Hello everyone, and welcome to this month's In the Kitchen program. I'm your host Sarah, and we're changing things up a bit this month by doing one of my go-to recipes instead of a recipe that we would find in a cookbook. Now, this month's recipe is a farro and kale salad. It's something that is probably available in other cookbooks as well as online. This was actually inspired by a recipe that I got in one of those grocery boxes where they send you stuff. It was originally a stuffed delicata squash with farro and kale. For the original recipe, they called for 2 medium-sized delicata squash that you cut in half, you core out, you cook at 400 degrees until it becomes tender. While you're doing that, you cook the farro and then you kind of prepare everything in a bowl, which we're going to do a lot of. Once the squash is done, then you'll go ahead and fill them in boats and then cook everything together to help kind of marry all the flavors together, melt the cheese. I actually found that this often overflowed onto my oven. It overflowed into every crevice of my oven. So I thought, what better way to change this up a bit than just by dicing up the squash? And then I started to go, wow, I really like the squash, but are there other things that we could do for it, especially when you can't find squash or the type of squash that you're looking at the store? So that's what we're going to play with a lot today. To get started, what I've already done is I've prepared, this is about 2 to 2.5 cups of farro. The original recipe only called for about 1.5 cups. It really depends on what you're doing. I've kind of increased the quantity size to match this. It all depends on what you want to do. The original recipe called for I don't want to say unprocessed, but it calls for a kale bunch that you just cut up and you set aside. You'll coat with a little bit of oil later. If you're looking to stay heart healthy, this is a perfect option for you. What I love to do is create kale chips. I love the flavor, the smoky flavor that is imparted from kale chips just by themselves. I can eat kale chips all day. Otherwise, when you add it to a meal such as this, it adds a lot of smoky flavor, especially since you're playing with a lot of textures and flavors in this dish. It pairs quite well with feta or any other kind of gourd or squash that you're looking for. I haven't tried this with any other variety. I bet this would be great with spinach, but again, this is my farro and kale recipe, so we're going to stay close to the kale. Here you will notice that this doesn't necessarily look like butternut squash. Getting into the color range, but a lot of times you'll go to the store and you'll find that butternut squash is actually out of season or it's just not being stocked. There's usually spaghetti squash, other varieties of squash, and I've tried a variety of them, but what I found is I really enjoy this recipe as well with a sweet potato, a garnet sweet potato to be precise, because I really love the pop of color that it provides. And then similarly, when you are toasting it, you can go ahead and get a nice kind of sweet potato fry flavor. Now again, if you're going healthy, there's ways around that. You can go ahead and cook the sweet potato up beforehand, chop it up into the bits. The problem with this is that the rest of it might get a little tacky or a little sticky, so this is best if you're eating the day of. Otherwise, you might want to coat it with, go the extra effort, cut it up ahead of time, coat it with just a little bit of olive oil. I ended up air frying them in my oven on a rack. I have a specialty rack baking sheet combo that just allows air to get underneath. So it's not fried as much. It wasn't sitting in the oil for the entire time it's cooking. So there are brown bits that fell through, but there's also a lot of just cooked, slightly crisp exterior. So you'll get that nice combo without sacrificing the healthiness of it. The original recipe does call for feta, as well as some lemon juice, as well as some cranberries. Cranberries, I've tried this with raisins, it's not that great. I love the tartness of cranberries, especially with all the flavors that we have going on here, so I highly recommend it. To get started, what we're going to do is just add, and this is so simple, this is going to be such a short video once you realize how short it is. So we're going to combine our cooked farro. Now mine is a little bit more liquidy. If you are going to do the last little bit and bake it in the oven, having it have a little bit more moisture will help everything absorb all the flavors. So it's okay if it's still a little wet when it goes into the bowl. As you can see, a nice healthy chunk. Then just add your ingredients. This is whatever you choose. You can choose to add all or some of your ingredients. For instance, I have dogs at home who love sweet potatoes, so I'll go ahead and often share my sweet potato mixture with them. Just depends. Very healthy for dogs. Now the nutty flavor of the farro, you might be able to replace this with some other grain, probably a wild rice, since that has a lot of the same nutty flavors in it. But again, this is a farro recipe, a farro salad. So that's why we're sticking with farro today. But this is completely flexible. We're going to add, and I wish you could be here and smell this. I've been saying how amazing it smells all day. I love the smell of charred, pretty much everything, but especially kale chips. What do you think? Can you smell that?
I can smell it.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure it smells.
It smells amazing. I love making kale chips. So if you're not familiar with making kale chips, there are recipes online. You can go ahead and coat this with a bit of oil, olive oil. I decided to get the kind of the wavier kale just because I like how bits and pieces of it catch the heat differently. So you'll have just a variety of textures as compared to the flatter varieties of kale. All depends. You coat it with a little bit of salt to help dehydrate it, but also give it that chip flavor. You need a little bit of salt. Now, because I have the salt on the kale as well as the sweet potatoes to help dry them out during the bake and to help crisp the exteriors, and I know that there's going to be salt in here, I'm not going to add a lot of salt to my farro. I know a lot of people are looking for heart-healthy meals. Since you can choose how much salt to add, you can even choose to exclude the feta altogether. This might be an option for you. Okay, so here's this. As you can see, just a ton of textures and colors popping out there. This does ask you to add some lemon juice, just a teaspoon. This is to taste, of course, so if you like more of the crisp flavor of lemon juice, you can do that. Since I'm going more for a smoky flavor, I tend to add it just for pops of freshness, especially as this sits in the fridge for the next couple of days. Otherwise, you can leave it out if that's not really your thing. It's part preservation purpose, but it does add a brightness, especially when you're using the butternut squash. If you're using the butternut squash, I highly recommend using the lemon juice and tasting with that. Otherwise, with the sweet potatoes, lemon, they don't clash necessarily. It's just not as prevalent when you're using it with the sweet potato. So cranberries, this is just a standard package. I tend to go with less sweet cranberries just generally. If you're trying to be heart healthy, you would agree with that because a lot of cranberries, since they are so tart, tend to be sweetened. Otherwise, you can get a standard package and toss it in. I love cranberries and feta together, that sweetness and muskiness. And this, of course, is to taste. So if you don't like cranberries, you can go ahead and leave them out, or any reasons. Drop a comment in the comment section if you end up trying this with raisins. You could always add pepper to this. That's always an option. If you want to add like pockets of spice in there, that's what makes this really beautiful. I'm not going to add that today just because there's already, with the kale, there's already a lot of smoky flavors. There we go. There's already a bit of, yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. What am I trying to say? Great question. If you know what I'm saying out there, please leave that in the comment section. Okay. So once you finish this recipe, as you can see, we have our bits of feta, and I'm trying to break them down just to more equally disperse that. But in the original recipe, you end up putting these back in, creating the boats and putting them back into the oven in order to melt the cheese. I highly recommend that with this recipe. Since I have a tiny oven here, I'm going to put it in a tiny little baking dish and stick it in our oven just to finalize it. But otherwise, you can stick this, you can get it all together. It still tastes great when it's still whole like this. Like I could eat it as is, just dumping it in. What happens when you put it in the oven is that really helps loosen all the feta. So when you go to mix it in, it'll just coat more evenly. You'll get that bitterness more consistently and then get the big pops of flavor throughout. It helps some of these bigger chunks weaken up just a little bit to help prevent just a mouthful of feta. But, you know, I'm not particularly adverse to that. So it's all about your preference. I haven't tried this with other cheeses. I don't have a great recommendation. Gouda doesn't really seem great as a substitute, but yeah, that's all up to you. If you end up trying something and it works particularly fantastic, please come to the library and tell me. I will be happy to give it a try at home. Otherwise, most of the time when people are making this, like I've given this recipe to other people, they tend to leave out cheese entirely because they are looking for that heart healthier aspect. And the cheese is definitely the biggest culprit of fat and salt in this. So if you do leave it out, just add a little bit more salt if you're going for a good flavor. Unless you've trained yourself to be on a low sodium diet, then I think you'll be just fine. So again, here is our kale and farro salad with a lot of diversity. You can use butternut squash, you can use a potato, as I've done here. You can choose to use the kale raw, you can choose to cook it just a little. It's really what is up to you. At this point, if I was at home, I would take a large baking dish, put this in, probably cook it at 200 to 300 because I'm impatient until the cheese has melted just a little, and then serve it. If I'm at work, like I bring spares to work, I will often just put it in the oven just a little, just to encourage that cheese to go just a little bit further. There is a tendency for this to dry out just a little while it's sitting in the fridge over the next couple of days. You could add a little bit of olive oil if you want to stay or use that without affecting the flavor too much. You could add a little bit more lemon juice just to zest up the flavor. Otherwise, just adding a little bit of water, sprinkling that on top just so everything rehydrates just a little bit more. Again, as you like cook the cranberries, those actually kind of provide that that moisture that you like, that type of moisture feeling that you're looking for, so it doesn't feel as dry. So this is one of my go-to meals. I hope that you make it at home, and if you make any fabulous changes that you would like to pass on, please use the comment section down below, as well as come into the library and tell me about them. Otherwise, I hope you will be able to make it into the library within the next few months. We'll be having a number of cooking demonstrations in the fall, and I hope that you keep your eye out. If you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe here, where I will be talking your ear off about it more and more. But you can also follow us online at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even Pinterest if that's your thing. As well as we have our online newsletter, so you can go to our website, you can type in westlandoregon.gov/library, and you can find our newsletter there. Otherwise, thank you for joining me in the kitchen this month, and I will see you next time. Thank you.